Welcome to Front Office Pros. NFL free agency is winding down, and we decided it is time to bring out those report cards and give offseason grades thus far for every NFL team. We are first going to start with the AFC, and then our next video is going to be the NFC. Before we get started, we're asking you to write in the comments which NFL team in the AFC conference do you think has had the best offseason so far? Hike! So we're going to start off with the AFC East. For all the divisions, we're going to be going from the best in the standings to the worst in the standings as of the 2022 season. The Buffalo Bills re-signed safety Jordan Poyer. They also added guard Connor McGovern. Some other notable additions they had: they signed wide receiver Deontay Hardy, running back Damian Harris, re-signed punter Sam Martin, re-signed defensive tackle Jordan Phillips, signed safety Taylor Rapp, and signed a new backup quarterback in Kyle Allen. Some notable departures for them were linebacker Tremaine Edmonds, running back Devin Singletary, quarterback Case Keenum, who was their former backup, and wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie. Shaq Lawson remains unsigned. Joe, based on the Buffalo Bills, what grade would you give them?
Yeah, I gave the Bills a B minus, Steve. I think while they were able to, it was key for them to, keep Jordan Poyer. That was honestly probably their big move this offseason. I do also like the Taylor Rapp signing, just to add some safety depth as well. The Damian Harris move was a little confusing to me, as there was rumors about them getting a bigger back, like a Derrick Henry type, possibly, or maybe even a Leonard Fournette. So, I took a little off for that. And then, I can't blame them for not bringing back Edmonds. He just got paid a ton of money with the Chicago Bears. So I can't really fault him there.
Yeah, I think that B minus grade is really fair for them. I think one of the reasons why I have it as a B minus is because they were able to keep Jordan Poyer. I thought for sure that they were going to lose Poyer and Edmonds. So for them to bring back Poyer is great. I think Edmonds is a really talented player. They were up against the salary cap, so they weren't able to keep him, which is unfortunate. I would have liked to have had them keep Tremaine Edmonds. The other thing I would really want them to do is get a receiver. I thought maybe they'd be able to sign Odell Beckham. He's still outstanding, and there have been rumors about them possibly trading for DeAndre Hopkins. They really need a second receiver in that offense. I don't think Gabe Davis cuts it as a wide receiver too. And so I think that's why then, in the end of the day, they get a B minus.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Odell or Hopkins is still yet to come because, they restructured some contracts and freed up a lot of space, but we haven't exactly seen them use it yet. So I'm interested to see what they end up doing with that free space that they cleared up there.
The Miami Dolphins traded for cornerback Jalen Ramsey. They also signed linebacker David Long, formerly of the Tennessee Titans. Some other notable additions: they signed quarterback Mike White to be a backup to Tua, signed wide receiver Braxton Berrios. They retained running back Raheem Mostert, running back Jeff Wilson, as well as running back Myles Gaskin. They also re-signed edge rusher Andrew Van Ginkel. They lost tight end Mike Gesicki, linebacker Elandon Roberts. They also have some players that were starters from last year who are still currently free agents. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. Left tackle Eric Fisher, edge rusher Melvin Ingram, safety Eric Rowe, backup quarterback Teddy Bridgewater, and they cut cornerback Byron Jones. So, Joe, what grade would you give the Miami Dolphins?
Yeah, I know me and you disagree on this here with the Dolphins, but I gave them a B primarily because of the, I like the trade for Jalen Ramsey. He's an upgrade over Byron Jones. And then I really like the David Long Jr. move at linebacker. You mentioned them losing Elandon Roberts, but, being able to have David Long there, he's a really talented linebacker. I like that move. And then, they, even though it sucks for fantasy, them, retaining Wilson and Mostert, guys that played pretty well for them last year, was key. And then, being able to sign Mike White to back up Tua, as we all know that he's got the concussion issues and health issues. I think Mike White can be a decent backup in the league.
I think for me, I ended up giving them a C plus, and the reason why is I just was disappointed with how they proceeded with the offseason. I do like the Jalen Ramsey trade. I agree with you there. I do think he is a name. I think, I mean, he's one of the best corners, but he does get burned sometimes. So I just don't think the secondary definitely improved, but I don't think that it automatically, ends up giving them like a high grade because of just the Ramsey move. I like the David Long signing. I think he's better than Landon Roberts, so I think that'll work out for them. But I really didn't like the Tua fifth-year option. To me, he has a lot of injury concerns, and the fifth-year option is going to be slightly less than what the franchise tag was going to be next year. So to me, I'd rather have not, accepted that fifth-year option, see how he does next year, and then worst comes to worst, if you don't want to sign him, then you franchise tag him. But I'm also a little bit concerned by that fifth-year option. And you mentioned the running backs. I'm a little disappointed with how they proceeded. Now, this offseason grade may change depending on what they do in the draft. A lot of their top picks are gone. I'd be curious to see, if they end up drafting a running back. But I'm just not that excited about Mostert, Jeff Wilson coming back as their starting running backs.
Yeah, it's not the most exciting, but at the end of the day, they're guys that fit the system that they run, with McDaniel coming over from 49ers, and they're both, former 49er running backs. So it makes sense from that standpoint. And then I do agree with you with the Tua fifth-year option. It definitely is risky for a guy that's proven that he can't really stay healthy.
The New England Patriots signed wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. They signed tight end Mike Gesicki. They were able to re-sign cornerback Jonathan Jones. Some other notable signings, they signed running back James Robinson, offensive lineman Riley Reif. They were able to retain safety Jabril Peppers and also sign offensive guard Connor McDermott. They did end up losing wide receiver Jacoby Myers, as well as wide receiver Nelson Aguilar. So, Joe, what grade would you give the New England Patriots?
Yeah, I'm going to give the Patriots a B+. I think it's been a solid offseason for them. I like the acquisition of bringing in Juju Smith-Schuster, them being able to hang on to Jonathan Jones, and then, Gesicki is another weapon on the offense, as well as signing Reif at offensive tackle. I think they've had a pretty solid offseason so far.
Yeah, I think the offseason started slow for them, and some were kind of questioning it, but then, some of the signings started to tack in. And for me, I give them a B+ as well. I like Juju. I like him better than Jacoby Myers personally, so I think that's an upgrade for them. And I really like Mike Gesicki. I think he has a great opportunity there as the starting tight end, and with that familiarity with Bill O'Brien, knowing that Bill O'Brien, was trying to recruit him. To me, I think it's going to be a good match. It'll be interesting. There have been some rumors recently about whether or not it's going to be Bailey Zappi or Mac Jones. I think it will be Mac Jones at the end of the day. But I think this team has improved because of the moves they've made so far.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you there. I am definitely intrigued to see Gesicki in this offense. He just was a guy that was underutilized with Miami, as he, didn't fit their run blocking scheme and couldn't really get on the field there for whatever reason. And, Miami used it Smythe instead. So I'm excited to see Gesicki potentially get unleashed in this offense and see what kind of production he'll have.
The New York Jets signed wide receiver Alan Lazard. They were able to re-sign linebacker Quincy Williams, sign wide receiver McCole Hardman. They also have brought back defensive tackle Solomon Thomas. As far as the departures go, they traded Elijah Moore to move up in the draft. They lost defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, as well as quarterback Mike White, wide receiver Braxton Berrios, and they also lost running back James Robinson. So, Joe, what grade would you give the New York Jets?
Yeah, I'm gonna give them a grade A, and that's largely, due to the fact that I assume that they're going to be able to get this deal done to get Aaron Rodgers be their quarterback. Last year they were pretty much just better quarterback play away from, playoffs. Who knows if they would have got to the playoffs, what kind of run they would have had. I think adding in Lazard, McCole Hardman will be interesting to see how they utilize those guys in the offense. And I like the trade of Elijah Moore for them, moving up in the draft. He's just a guy that needed a change of scenery. They didn't use him for whatever reason. It wasn't working out. So I think it was good for them to move on and trade up in the draft.
Yeah, for me, I gave the Jets a B-. I know the Aaron Rodgers trade looms large, but even if the trade happens, I still am going to keep it at a B- for me. I don't know what they're going to have to give up to get him, and I'm not so sure that he's going to be there for more than a year. And if they don't win the Super Bowl and they end up maybe going into the, deeper in the playoffs or make the playoffs because they have him, and then he ends up retiring, then what benefit is it really going to be to them? They have Zach Wilson. They haven't been able to develop him. I understand the need to get a quarterback, but I would almost be more inclined for them to go after Lamar Jackson personally. As far as the other moves, I hate the move of getting rid of Elijah Moore. He's a very talented player. I think he's going to do really well. And in return, you bring in Alan Lazard and McCole Hardman instead. It really doesn't do much for me. I actually would probably put them lower as far as my grade's concerned. But with them getting Aaron Rodgers, most likely I had to give them at least a B-.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely interesting. I don't, I think whatever they have to give up for Aaron Rodgers is gonna be worth it for them, because I don't really like Lamar Jackson. I don't think he's that great of a quarterback, so I don't think that actually improved things for them. And bringing in a veteran quarterback like Rodgers, even if he's there for a year, maybe that he's the type of player that could help get the most out of Zach Wilson, or Zach Wilson could learn a thing or two from watching a guy like Aaron Rodgers play.
Next, we're going to be talking about the AFC North. The Cincinnati Bengals signed offensive tackle Orlando Brown. They were able to re-sign linebacker Jermaine Pratt. They signed safety Nick Scott. They signed tight end Irv Smith. As far as the departures, they lost both safeties in safety Jesse Bates and safety Von Bell. They lost tight end Hayden Hurst, as well as running back Samaje Perine. So, Joe, what grade would you give the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, I know we disagree with this one. Pretty wide gap here, but I'm gonna give them an A-, Steve. I like the moves that they did. I feel like they're solid in replacement guys. I know, they lost Von Bell and didn't end up paying Bates. He got paid elsewhere in free agency. But I like the guys that the secondary help that they bring back, Sidney Jones. And then being able to get Orlando Brown at left tackle, I like that move to protect Joe Burrow. I mean, that's first and foremost. This Bengals got to really shore up that offensive line. And then, they also brought in Irv Smith Jr. at tight end, who I also think is an interesting player, and excited to see how the Bengals potentially use him in the offense.
Yeah, Sidney Jones is a good one, Joe. I forgot to even mention him. But I rated the Bengals as a C+ for me. I think losing your safeties in Bates and Von Bell, that's a typical loss. I know they drafted Dax Hill to eventually replace them, but losing both is a pretty big loss. You mentioned Irv Smith. He's an interesting signing. He's going to go in for Hayden Hurst, but Irv Smith has not been able to stay healthy, and so I have a little bit of concern around that. It's an intriguing ad. And then losing Perine, I think they could have kept him, and who knows what's going on with running back Joe Mixon. So to me, I just think at the end of the day, they didn't add enough talent to make this team better, and that's why at the end of the day, I give them a slight increase with a C+, but it's just kind of an okay offseason so far, in my opinion.
Yeah, running back, that is the one position, that they're going to have to focus on in the draft, and I'm interested to see who they'll take. I mean, Perine definitely is significant. I think he did more for the Bengals than people realize, especially in the pass game, and just being able to pick up the run blitzes and play in every third down, because Mixon really only plays first and second down.
The Baltimore Ravens gave the franchise tag to quarterback Lamar Jackson. They also signed wide receiver Nelson Aguilar and brought back running back Justice Hill and signed cornerback Trayvon Mullen on a prove-it deal. As far as the departures go, they lost offensive guard Ben Powers, interior defensive lineman Calais Campbell, and tight end Josh Oliver. Cornerback Marcus Peters, defensive end Justin Houston, cornerback Kyle Fuller, wide receiver Sammy Watkins, running back Kenyon Drake, wide receiver Demarcus Robinson, all remain unsigned and were starters for them last season. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, I'm giving the Ravens an F, Steve. They literally have like botched this offseason, especially with the whole Lamar Jackson thing going on. I think they got to find a way to appease them and make them happy at this point, because just their way their roster is constructed, and the way they play, I know that could potentially change with the new offensive coordinator, but the offensive line and the type of players they have just revolve around that style of play that they've had with the power run game and stuff with Lamar Jackson. So, interesting to see like what they'll do if they end up moving on from Lamar Jackson. If he in fact gets traded somewhere, I think he'll come back. But, outside of that, they lost their, power guard Ben Powers, as you mentioned, and a big force in their defensive line with Calais Campbell. I really just don't see how they've really gotten any better this offseason.
Yeah, Joe, I really feel like you hit the nail on the head, honestly. I gave them an F as well. I think they've completely botched this Lamar Jackson situation. I think they would have been better off either just signing him or trying to work with having him kind of talk to other teams and try to facilitate a trade. Who knows? Maybe there's been rumblings that maybe the Colts might still be in play, but I just feel like they botched it completely. The Ravens typically aren't big free agency players. If anything, they usually sign like a older veteran receiver who used to be good. But like you mentioned, they've lost some pretty valuable players on this team, and they really haven't added anything to it. So to me, I agree. I think they're an F for sure. The Pittsburgh Steelers re-signed defensive tackle Larry Ogunjobi, signed offensive guard Isaac Seumalo, signed cornerback Patrick Peterson, linebacker Cole Holcomb, as well as linebacker Elandon Roberts. As far as the departures go, they lost cornerback Cameron Sutton, linebacker Devin Bush, linebacker Robert Spillane, safety Terrell Edmonds. The Steelers also released linebacker Miles Jack, and he remains a free agent. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah, I'm giving them a B. I think they've made some solid moves in the free agency and the offseason period so far. I really like the guard they got from the Eagles. Ogunjobi is a good add along the defensive line. And then I like what they've done with the linebacker position. They moved on from Jack and Devin Bush, who just never really was able to do much with the Steelers between injuries and not being able to guard tight ends. So I like the Elandon Roberts and Cole Holcomb that they brought in. They didn't really do many flashy moves, but it's solid, and I feel like they've been able to improve with the moves that they did.
Yeah, I also gave the Pittsburgh Steelers a B. I was surprised that they released Miles Jack. Maybe he's just a name. If I followed more of his tape, I shouldn't be as surprised. I mean, he still remains a free agent, so that should tell you something. I do like Cole Holcomb. He's not a household name, but he's a tackling machine. Should fit really well with the Steelers. I like how they were able to bring back Ogunjobi, and I feel I'm happy for him because he signed that huge deal with the Bears, that failed the physical, and now signed a prove-it deal with the Steelers, and now is staying there long term. So good for him. And I think the biggest reason why I like their moves is I really like that Isaac Seumalo. Their offensive line is absolutely in tatters. So bringing him in there is going to help. Najee Harris is going to help. Kenny Pickett. And then, Patrick Peterson, I don't know how much he has left in the tank. I had heard from Mike Tomlin, he was saying that maybe he would transition him over to safety. That would be really interesting. But overall, I think it's a solid B for the Steelers.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you as well that Samalu along the offensive line is my favorite move. Just as you mentioned, Najee Harris in the run game and Kenny Pickett at quarterback.
The Cleveland Browns signed defensive tackle Dalvin Tomlinson, signed safety Juan Thornhill, re-signed center Ethan Posick, and also traded for wide receiver Elijah Moore. Some other notable signings, they were able to re-sign linebacker Sione Takitaki, re-sign linebacker Anthony Walker, signed tight end Jordan Akins, and defensive end Ogabonya Okoronkwo. As far as their departures, they lost quarterback Jacoby Brissett, defensive tackle Taven Bryan, quarterback Greedy Williams, running back Dearness Johnson, and edge rusher Chase Winovich. Some other notable players that were role players or starters for them that remain unsigned is linebacker Deion Jones, safety John Johnson, defensive end Jadeveon Clowney, and running back Kareem Hunt. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Cleveland Browns?
Yeah, I'm going to give them a B+. I really like the trade of Elijah Moore. I think that's really going to help Deshaun Watson in this offense. He's a really talented player that for whatever reason the Jets didn't use. I'm really curious to see how the Browns are going to utilize him and looking for him to do big things this year. And then, the other signings, Dalvin Tomlinson, I think he's just he doesn't really give you much in the pass rush, but he's a solid big guy to kind of help in the run game. Thornhill was brought in to kind of replace John Johnson, but I don't think he's as good. So I feel like, they've improved, especially with the Elijah Moore move. I like, Okonkwo as well. He's not a household name, but I like the way he rushes the passer. Had a pretty good season last year. So that was an interesting signing for me as well.
Yeah, I gave the Cleveland Browns a B. My favorite move for them is the trade, to get wide receiver Elijah Moore. I think he's a really talented player. I think he's going to just fit right into that offense and give Deshaun Watson a security blanket. And now with him and David Njoku and Amari Cooper and Nick Chubb, they've got one of the better offenses in the AFC. Ethan Posick, if I'm saying his name right, I believe he was the top center on the market, and they were able to bring him back. So I think that was a good move for them. But the thing I struggle with is I really don't like what they did with signing Juan Thornhill and releasing John Johnson. I think John Johnson's the better player. Now he still remains unsigned, which I don't really understand. But I think John Johnson, I don't know why they moved away from him to then add Juan Thornhill. And then the other thing is there are some notable unsigned players that that were good players for them. Running back Kareem Hunt, defensive end Jadeveon Clowney. So this will be interesting to see if they can fill those holes in the draft. Because you bring in a guy like Dalvin Tomlinson, who's kind of a run stuffer, but really now the only notable defensive lineman they have on that team is Myles Garrett. He's going to need extra support.
Yeah, definitely. I think guys like Kareem Hunt, John Johnson, and Clowney are guys that always seem to get added after the draft. They're guys that teams evaluate their draft and who's still available on the market, and if they didn't fill the holes with guys they liked in the draft, they then look to the free agency market. So I look for those guys to get moved later in free agency in the process here after the draft, around training camp time, perhaps.
Next, we're going to be talking about the AFC South. The Jacksonville Jaguars gave tight end Evan Ingram the franchise tag. They re-signed safety Andrew Wingard. They re-signed quarterback Trey Herndon, and they signed running back Dearness Johnson. As far as their departures, they lost offensive tackle Juwan Taylor, edge rusher Arden Kay, and wide receiver Marvin Jones. Some other notable players that remain unsigned, they released Shaquille Griffin, and he is a free agent still, and also interior defensive lineman Dwayne Smoot. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah, I gave them a C. I like the move of them adding Dearness Johnson. I think he's a good complementary back. Probably not a lot of people know about him because he's been stuck at the third running back spot for the Browns for the last few years, but I think he's a solid guy. And then Juwan Taylor is probably a big loss for them along the offensive line, but I like that they were able to bring back Evan Ingram He had his best year last year, and Doug Peterson likes to utilize the tight end. So, they haven't really done too much. So, I gave him a C.
Yeah, I gave the Jacksonville Jaguars a C+. I was close to giving them a C. They did lose Juwan Taylor, but they do have, Walker Little, former Stanford offensive tackle who was a high draft pick for them, and they do have offensive tackle Cam Robinson. So they have players to replace Juwan Taylor. I do like that they're keeping Evan Ingram, and like you mentioned, Joe, I do like Dearness Johnson. I think he will be a good change of pace back for Travis Etienne in that rushing game. Even though this wasn't an off-season move, and maybe I shouldn't credit them this, I did end up giving them a C+, sort of because of Calvin Ridley. I know they made that trade for Calvin Ridley, over the trade deadline last year, but he was removed off the suspension list. So to me, that was a big deal for them. And there wasn't necessarily a guarantee that was going to happen. More than likely it was. But because it was, I also like that Ridley's going to be in that offense.
Yeah, Steve, I had overlooked the Ridley move. I definitely like that move for the Jaguars, and I'm excited to see how he does after really not being able to see him play football recently, and just how the Jaguars plan to utilize him.
The Tennessee Titans signed offensive tackle Andre Dillard, edge rusher Arden Kay, linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair, cornerback Sean Murphy Bunting. As far as their departures go, they lost offensive guard Nate Davis, wide receiver Robert Woods, linebacker David Long, interior defensive lineman DeMarcus Walker, and tight end Austin Hooper. Some starters who remain unsigned are linebacker Zach Cunningham, edge rusher Bud Dupree, and they also cut left tackle Taylor Lewan. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Tennessee Titans?
Yeah, I give the Titans a C-. They've been up against it with the cap, so they've lost a ton of players. But some of the additions I like. I think Arden Key is a pretty good guy. He had a good year with the Jaguars last year, kind of a breakout year. He's a good depth piece along the defensive line there, and I like that they lose David Long Jr., but I like Azeez Al-Shaair, who they brought in to replace him at linebacker. I think that was a solid move as well. But then, just overall, this division really hasn't done too much, so that's why I gave him a C-.
Yeah, for me, I feel like the Titans got worse, and so as a result, I gave them a D-, especially when you compare them to the other teams in this division. I know they were up against the cap, and they now have a new GM, so a part of him coming in is reimagining what this team's going to look like. But there are a lot of notable starters that have been mainstays for them for quite some time who are no longer with the team. I do like the Azeez Al-Shaair signing, but how much better is he going to be than David Long? And I'm not very convinced that Andre Dillard can be a starting left tackle in this league. So at the end of the day, I don't think they really did anything to improve their team, and they just ended up getting worse. So I think they're going to be one of the teams that are going to regress quite mightily this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely could. I think I took a little easy on them just because they were up against the cap space. But, Dillard, I kind of agree with you there. But honestly, Lewan has been injured, he gets injured pretty much every year and hasn't just been available. So honestly, if Dillard's just available, he could be an upgrade at left tackle for them. But yeah, I mean, and then I think a lot of their season will depend on what are they doing with Tannehill? If he's going to end up being the guy there, or if they decide to move on from him as well, or, I don't know what's going on there.
The Indianapolis Colts signed defensive end Samson Ebukam. Kicker Matt Gay was able to re-sign linebacker E.J. Speed and sign quarterback Gardner Minshew, as well as wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie. As far as their departures go, they lost linebacker Bobby Ogereke and traded away cornerback Stephon Gilmore to the Dallas Cowboys. And some other notable starters that remained unsigned: defensive end Yannick Ngakoue, safety Rodney McLeod, and quarterback Matt Ryan was released. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah, I gave them a C- as well. Honestly, that might be a little generous. Largely, in fact, because one of the big moves that they made was way overpaying for a kicker. Don't quite understand why they gave Matt Gay that contract, but they did. And then, to me, the big loss is losing Bobby Okereke from their linebacker spot. He was one of their mainstays, and he's a really good player. They really should have found a way to keep him around, and maybe they could have if they were looking at their cap space and like, oh, let's go spend it all on the kicker. Maybe he could have taken a little bit up of that by re-signing him.
I was very close to giving the Indianapolis Colts an F, to be honest with you, but I ended up giving him a D because we are talking about a new regime change. And so with that, there is going to be a transitional period. But I got to tell you, I'm not all that excited about Shane Steichen, or however you say it. To me, I think there were some other head coaches that they were talking to that I think, to me, they had maybe more, they were more glamorous. I don't know. To me, he was just kind of a type of signing. And then after that, Ibukam is an okay player, but I think Yannick Ngakoue is a better player. And, Yannick Ngakoue remains unsigned. And like you said, Bobby Okereke, I think they could lose him because, they're hoping that Shaquille Leonard comes back healthy. He was dealing with a lot of health issues, and Zaire Franklin had a breakout year for them. And so they must be like, hey, we don't need to keep Okereke. But they really have done nothing to make this team better. And then the biggest indictment on them is they were in the sweepstakes to go up and get the number 1 pick in the draft, to get the quarterback they want, and they lost out to the Panthers. So now they're at 4, which they're basically in nomad's land because a team can jump up to 3 with the Cardinals, and then they're getting the 4th quarterback. So I don't think the Colts are very happy about that. Obviously, they're not saying that. But to me, that is just, it was a bad move altogether.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, they could also, they can't trade up to number 1, but they could also just trade up. Maybe they trade up with the Cardinals at the 3 and nobody jumps them, or, maybe they could get up to the 2 spot. Who knows?
I don't see why the Houston Texans would trade with them when they're going to get it. They want a quarterback. Why would they give that interdivisionally?
Maybe their quarterback goes off the board first.
That would be quite a puzzling move. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that in the NFL draft. I guess you never know. It's possible they go with 3. I'm just saying that when it comes to quarterbacks, their top 2 guys possibly could be completely off the board. Maybe not. We'll find out, and maybe they end up getting Will Levis or something, and they thought he was their number 1 guy. We won't know who's successful until a few years from now. But to me, they had an opportunity to kind of make this team in the image that they wanted, and they dropped the ball.
Yeah, but at the same token, they didn't have somebody like a DJ Moore to offer the Bears as well. I think DJ Moore played a big part in the reason why the Panthers were able to trade up and get that number 1 spot.
The Houston Texans signed wide receiver Robert Woods, safety Jimmy Ward, defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, tight end Dalton Schultz, running back Devin Singletary, brought in Case Keenum as the backup quarterback, signed linebacker Denzel Perryman, linebacker Corey Littleton, wide receiver Noah Brown. Let's just say they signed a lot of players. As far as their departures go, they lost Ogabonya Okaranko, tight end O.J. Howard, backup quarterback Kyle Allen, and tight end Jordan Akins. Other notable starters for them that remain unsigned are running back Rex Burkhead and defensive end Mario Addison and safety Jonathan Owens. So, Joe, what grade would you give the Houston Texans?
Yeah, I gave the Texans a B. I think aside from all the players that they've signed, the most important move they've made this offseason as getting D'Amico Ryans as their head coach. The Houston native, played for the Texans. He knows what the Texans organization is all about and what they're looking for. And I think he's going to do pretty well. Well, it'd be interesting to see what quarterback they're going to go with in their draft to really improve this team, because they're a mess at the quarterback position. But it's a roster that really needed a lot of revamping, and they've made a lot of interesting signings, and they really had to go out and do something.
Yeah, to me, I agree with you. I really like the D'Amico Ryans hire, and because I like it so much, I gave them a B+. I gave it a little bit more. And I really just like the players they were able to bring in. I also, didn't mention that they traded Brandon Cooks away, and they also were able to give a long-term extension to Laramie Tunsil. Having Laramie Tunsil as the, cornerstone offensive tackle for them is huge for whatever rookie quarterback they bring in. I think Dalton Schultz could bring some life to that tight end room. And I just like a lot of the signings they made. They were just, this team needed a talent overhaul, and you're starting to see it because that team was just inept. They had no talent last year. I think they're going to be a lot more competitive this year.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Dalton Schultz signing, I'm really interested to see how he does with the Texans this year. And I agree. I also like the fact that they were able to trade Brandon Cooks away. He's a guy that, aging wide receiver, didn't really fit what they're trying to do there. And, they were able to get a pick for him instead of just releasing him from the Cowboys.
Next, we're going to be talking about the AFC West, the Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs. That's tough for us to say, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, me especially, man. I just, I don't know. I can't get the Chiefs just won't go away.
They signed offensive tackle Jawan Taylor, interior defensive lineman Charles Omenihu, linebacker Drew Tranquil. For their departures, they lost offensive tackle Orlando Brown, wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster, safety Juan Thornhill, offensive tackle Andrew Wiley, and wide receiver McCole Hardman. Some other notable starters who remain unsigned for them is defensive end Frank Clark, defensive end Carlos Dunlap, and running back Jerick McKinnon. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, I gave the Chiefs a C-. It's never good when you start the offseason by losing both of your offensive tackles. They lose Dwayne Brown, Wiley at right tackle. I know they brought in Taylor, but they're also trying to, he's mainly played right tackle, and they're going to try to, strike lightning in a bottle 2 times. They were able to take Dwayne Brown from the right side and move him over to the left, and they're trying to do the same thing with Taylor. Interesting to see if it'll work out like it did with Brown. But yeah, other than that, as you see with most Super Bowl teams, especially when you win, you tend to lose a lot more players than you gain. And Frank Clark's another big loss for them.
Yeah, when it comes to the Kansas City Chiefs, I agree with you. I gave them a C. I think they were able to weather the storm a decent bit. They weren't able to retain some of their players that helped them to get to the Super Bowl. And like you said, with them getting the Super Bowl, you thought that they were going to lose some players. So, I think it is what it is. I agree with you. The Jawan Taylor move is kind of a gamble on their part. They did it with Orlando Brown, hoping to do it again. It'll be interesting to see, with the loss of Juju Smith-Schuster, can the guys like Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney, can they step up and fill that volume role that Juju had? I'm not as much concerned about losing Juan Thornhill. I think he was a little bit overrated. They have to hope that the safety that they drafted out of the University of Cincinnati, hopefully he ends up stepping in. Brian Cook, hopefully he steps in as a starter for them. The Los Angeles Chargers signed linebacker Eric Kendricks. They signed offensive tackle Trey Pipkins, and they also retained tight end Donald Parham. As far as their departures go, they lost linebacker Drew Tranquil and defensive end Morgan Fox. Some other notable starters for them that remain unsigned: edge rusher Kyle Van Noy. He was more of a role player for them. Slot corner, Bryce Callahan. Joe, what grade do you give the LA Chargers?
Yeah, I'm giving them a C minus as well, Steve. They really haven't done much to improve. They did bring in Eric Kendricks. I do like him. He is an older veteran player. It's a team that they've battled a lot of injuries in the past. For their sake, we'll hope that he stays healthy and can produce as he normally does. I understand that they were against the cap, but, I really feel like thus far they haven't really got that much better.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I was close to give them a lower grade, but they were a team that were really up against the cap. You were talking about players like Keenan Allen and Khalil Mack that they were, there was some conversation around whether they had to cut them or not. You've got running back Austin Eckler who wants to have a contract extension, but I think they weathered the storm really well. Drew Tranquil was a great player for them, but I think Eric Kendricks is a better player. We'll see. He is older, so we'll see if he can continue with the performance that Tranquil did. But the reason why I give them a C plus is really because they were able to keep their guys intact and be able to give it another go. Now, I do think this is the last road show, for Brandon Staley and the team that's currently constructed. If they're not able to succeed, I think that you could definitely, though I obviously keep Herbert and extend him, but Allen's getting older, Mack's getting older. J.C. Jackson, if he doesn't, get healthy and play well, could end up being a bust signing for them. So they might have to hit the reset button in LA possibly.
Yeah, I kind of almost think they should have hit the reset button, especially with Brandon Staley. After blowing that lead against the Jaguars in the playoffs, I don't know how he came back. He should have been as good as gone right after that. And then, I don't know if they, Khalil Mack has been okay. I think they could have moved on from him and saved some money. And, you could also, Yannick Ngakoue is still out there. There's some older edge rushers that are available that could give you some decent performance. So I don't, the fact that Keenan Allen was a big one, I think they could have saved some money and got rid of Mack, though.
The Las Vegas Raiders gave running back Josh Jacobs a franchise tag and then ended up signing the most players out of any team in free agency. They signed quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo, wide receiver Jacoby Myers, able to re-sign defensive tackle Jerry Tillery, signed safety Marcus Epps, both tight ends in Austin Hooper and O.J. Howard. As far as their departures go, they released Derek Carr, which was quite the saga for a good portion of the offseason. They also lost linebacker Denzel Perryman. They lost Darren Waller in the form of a trade to the New York Giants. They lost wide receiver Mac Hollins. Some other notable starters for them that remain unsigned: cornerback Anthony Averett and cornerback Rock Yassin, and safety Duron Harmon. So, Joe, what grade do you give the Las Vegas Raiders?
Yeah, I'm going to give them a B plus. I know, people can look at it and be like, oh, look at the names and the guys that they, either released or traded and got rid of. But honestly, they're guys that really didn't fit McDaniels' system. So I feel like, he's gotten guys like Garoppolo, and then they get Jacoby Myers over from New England. They're really getting guys that fit the system. They might not have the stats and how good they've been, like Darren Waller's been a top tight end and stuff, but I don't know if he exactly fits what the Raiders are trying to do. So, I gave them a B plus because I think they lost some big names that have produced for them, but they brought in guys that better fit what they're trying to do.
Yeah, for me, I disagree with you on this one. I gave the Raiders a C minus. I think going away from Derek Carr to then pivot to Jimmy Garoppolo, to me, it's a very puzzling move. I think Derek Carr, the younger player, and I think the better player. So to me, I understand that Jimmy Garoppolo understands McDaniel's offensive system, but at some point as a head coach, you got to be able to use the players that you have and mold your offense based on the type of talent that you have. And to me, I think that's a failure on McDaniel's part. They had a ton of cap space. They could have re-signed Josh Jacobs. Instead, they give him the franchise tag. And then Darren Waller, it's kind of a confusing move. They gave him that extension. They must have not liked how he handled everything. He was not available for them. They decided to move away from him. I just think at the end of the day, the Raiders made a ton of moves, but I think they got worse. It will be interesting to see what they do in the draft. I think they could draft a quarterback because I think Jimmy G really is only there to be a bridge quarterback.
Yeah. I'm sure Jimmy G is, just the bridge, and they're going to allow McDaniels to take some in the draft and take, quote unquote, his guy potentially. But I kind of disagree with you. About Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think Derek Carr is that good. I think he's a solid quarterback, but you don't win games. You don't really win games for either guy, but at least Jimmy Garoppolo is more proven. He's actually won playoff games. He made it to the Super Bowl. Derek Carr, yeah, he's had some good stats and stuff, but he's never really won anything. And the one times they made it to the playoffs with Carr, they lost to the Bengals.
Your Denver Broncos, Joe, signed offensive tackle Mike McGlinchey, interior defensive lineman Zach Allen, interior offensive lineman Ben Powers was able to re-sign linebacker Alex Singleton. We didn't mention this guy, but also stole him from the division, but signed quarterback Jarrett Stidham from the Raiders to be a backup quarterback to Russell Wilson, and signed running back Samaje Perine. As far as the departures go, the Denver Broncos lost interior defensive lineman Draymond Jones and interior defensive lineman Deshaun Williams. Some other notable starters that remain unsigned are cornerback Ronald Darby, offensive tackle Billy Turner, safety Kareem Jackson, and offensive lineman Dalton Reiser. So, Joe, what grade would you give your Denver Broncos?
All right, I'm giving the Broncos an A-. First and foremost, they make the trade for Sean Payton, get a real coach, and moving on from Nathaniel Hackett. And then I like what they've done immediately addressing the offensive line. Mike McGlinchey, Ben Powers, these people on Twitter can say what they want about McGlinchey and overspending, but, sometimes you have to overspend to get your guy, and that's fine with me. And then I actually like the Zach Allen signing. He's a bit of an upgrade over Draymond Jones in terms of, more of an all-around player against the run, and like what he adds with the blocking passes.
Yeah, I ended up giving the Broncos a B+. A little harsh for Nathaniel Hackett, Joe, but I do agree. I think Sean Payton, his expertise, I think he's going to help the Broncos immensely. I do not like that they traded a first-round pick for him, and I think that's really rich. But, hey, if he gives them the leadership that they need to right the ship, I'm sure I'll hear you say it was well worth it. And at the end of the day, it was basically Bradley Chubb for Sean Payton, which most Broncos fans I hear would do that in a heartbeat. As far as the rest of the signings go, really like what they've done with the offensive line. They completely overhauled it, really. And people don't realize how big of a negative that was for the offense and how much I think it affected Russell Wilson. So I think it should be much improved. And Zach Allen is not a household name, but he's a great player. To me, it's kind of a flip-flop between him and Draymond Jones, both very good. But at the end of the day, I gave him a B+. They shelled out a ton of money. I really like the Perine signing. I think he could be really good for them. I just want to give him the A just because I don't love the first-round pick for Payton.
No worries, Steve. Like you said, Bradley Chubb for Payton. I do that every day of the week. And, could have been harsh for Hackett, but the guy just, he had no confidence out there as head coach. He had to hire, Harry Rosberg just to make some decisions because he couldn't handle all the responsibilities. So that tells you everything you need to know. First round pick for Payton is our least of our concerns, especially, if he turns around the offense, where if we just scored 18 points a game last year, our record would have been way better and we would have been a playoff team.
I think we probably should have known there was a problem when that move happened in week 2.
Yeah, 100%.
Sounding alarms should be going off in people's heads.
Well, I just wish they would have let Rosberg be the head coach, because at the end of the season, he showed he could actually get the players to play for him.
So that concludes our offseason grades for every NFL team in the AFC conference. If you enjoyed this content, we ask you to please like this video so others can see it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We also recently joined Apple and Spotify podcasts, so you can follow us there as well. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you tune in to our next video for the NFC grades. But until then, we will see you next time.